welcome everyone. We'll be starting shortly.
Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Rethink Doing Business in Africa, the 9th annual IE Africa Business Conference. This conference is special because for the first year ever, we are virtual. My name is Naima.
My name is Zaria.
We are IE Africa Club coordinators, and this evening we will be your MCs.
So the general agenda structure will include the first panel discussion, followed by a 10-minute break, and then the final panel discussion. So for more information, please view our booklet.
Yes. And after each panel discussion, we will leave approximately 15 minutes for the Q&A discussion. So you can just type all of your questions in the chat box.
And now I'm pleased to announce to you our very own president of the IE University, Mr. Santiago Iniguez, to give the welcome note.
Santiago? Oh, unmute.
Unmute, please.
He's silent.
Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. No, first, thanks very much, Zaria, Naima, for inviting me for this very special event at IE University. You know, we have lots of clubs at our campus, but the only regional club that I regularly attend year after year is actually this very important Africa Day for our institution. You know, Africa represents, in my opinion, the future of our civilization, not just the past, because you all probably know that our early ancestors came actually from the continent. But the future of humanity depends very much on the sustainable growth of Africa. And here at IE University, we want to have a leading center for research on African studies. That's why we created 2 years ago the IE Africa Center, in order to become the hub of African studies here in Europe. We are very proud to attract every year a good number of students from Africa, from all the different latitudes of the continent. We are also very proud of developing a number of activities there on site, and also to have physical offices in places like Cape Town and Lagos. And we plan to improve our presence in the continent. You probably know Felicia Appenteng, who's actually the chair of the IE Africa Center, and I hope she has the chance during the day to share with you some of the very important activities that we are developing this year that will have a certain... We just... yes? Okay. I guess someone was actually silencing me. But anyway, I'll probably, be brief, given that the very interesting presentations come next. Let me thank all the speakers who are taking part at this conference. We very much look forward to your thoughts, opinions, and knowledge on the very interesting things that you're going to discuss. Let me, of course, thank the chair and all the members of the IE Africa club at IE University who are organizing this extremely interesting event. And let me also say that I'm at your entire disposal in case you want to promote any particular initiative that is related to the development of Africa, to the entrepreneurialism in Africa, or to the diffusion of the very rich African culture and the arts. I'm here, to support the mission of IE, and I can tell you that that mission for the future is very closely linked to Africa. So what I hope is that you enjoy the day, that you enjoy the different panels. I will try to be attending some of them, but I'll probably mute both my micro as well as my camera. But I'll be entering and exiting since I have also to attend some other things today. Anyway, what I hope is that we see each other on campus very soon. We plan to open the activities, teaching activities in June, as far as the authorities allow. And of course, what I look forward is actually meeting all the members of the Africa Club and all of you who are interested in developing ventures and initiatives related to this very cherished continent. So thanks very much for inviting me, and I hope you enjoy the day.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now the keynote address from the co-founder of SoftTribe Limited, one of Africa's largest software companies, number 17 on the list of 20 most notable Black innovators in technology, and his companies have won numerous accolades in the IT sector. He will also be joining us in the ICT discussion. Please welcome Mr. Herman Tinnery Hasse.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Just as we started, someone called me back. Okay, I'm going to try to be brief. Now, impact on the African continent, ICT, and its impact on Africa coming forward in transformation. My background is in software, but I'm generally a tech entrepreneur. Come up with software products, and we sell. We sell to government, we sell to the public sector. I've done this since 1990. It's been a lot of fun. There have been a few challenges. We've worked in many African countries. So I think I've got a broad picture of what's going on, and I'm going to make an attempt to pontificate on what is yet to come. Now, first thing I'll say is that I think that Africa's underdevelopment is actually an advantage with the state of play today, in that there are countries that have vested interests because they have been more technologically advanced in the past. And because of that, there are people who don't want certain newer, more disruptive technologies to come about, to emerge. And this is not the case in our part of the world, in Africa, because a lot of things don't exist at all. So we will take anything. Now, I'll give you an example of that. We didn't have very many landlines in Ghana. Now we have more mobile phones than people. This rapid transformation is an example of what I'm describing, where the adoption of new technologies would happen quicker in Africa, which I think is great. It's good for Africa. We've been blessed that we're coming up at a time when these technologies are coming up and we don't have anything and we don't have any legacy systems. So that's an advantage. This will allow us to leapfrog in Africa. We'll leapfrog a lot of steps in a lot of other countries, such that we'll get there quicker, I think. Even in the corona, I'm locked down in Ghana, so this is relevant. One will not believe the number of new businesses that ride on ICT infrastructure that have emerged. And for the ones that existed before, they have expanded very quickly in this corona period. So silver lining. As we know from our friend from Kenya, M-Pesa and stuff like that, it's now spreading across the continent. Lots of innovations. M-Pesa is just one of them. Many other, some even more advanced innovations in financial services over the mobile phone across the continent. I see a situation where, I mean, once again, the corona brought this to our attention. Education can be delivered through the mobile phone, through laptops, through tablets. And that's happening a lot in Ghana now. That I predicted. An example of what is possible. And if I were an African government, I would, given the corona, given the experience, I would seriously start exploring not building classrooms. That's where the bottleneck is. The logistics, the financing of classrooms, and the attendant delays, whatever, handicaps.
Hi, Herman, your voice is dropping a little bit.
It's dropping. Okay,
your voice is dropping a bit. Yeah.
I'll speak louder.
Thank
okay,
you.
So,
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of education, given corona, we have now seen it is possible to educate children via ICT. I think that our governments could consider, for example, going forward, not having to build so many classrooms, etc. So these are the kinds of things. I see applications in international trade between African countries. I think ICT will give us the roads, and the networks, and the infrastructure for us to do trade amongst ourselves, which we are doing too little of as Africans at the moment. Even in the media, today, nobody who is corrupt can hide. Somebody will post it on Facebook. So these are subtle social advantages that we are benefiting from given ICT. I have a product that we sell. It sells quite well. It's the largest security company or product in Ghana at the moment. It's called Hey Jula, which means Hey Thief. And it works on mobile phones. The thief comes to your house, you hear some noises outside, you text or call a certain number. The number doesn't even, you don't even have to answer. It recognizes the phone number that's calling. It will send the police. It will send messages to your neighbors who will come out shouting. The thieves will run away. It will launch a drone to your house to come and check and see what's happening. It launches a message to the radio stations. They start now saying, oh, there's a house number 12, the one with the yellow gates. There's something happening in that house. Everybody go and help them. Help, help, help. These are little tricks, little Africanizations that ride on the ICT infrastructure. And because these are mass market products, we can actually sell these for very cheap so the poorer people can afford. And there's another thing, just plain communication that ICT brings. Like when the mobile phones came, that was the last time you're going to your barber and you can now call and check whether your barber is there or not, or your mechanic is there before you go. It's unimaginable how much fuel has been saved, how much time has been saved just by having this communication. Areas like agriculture, I can see a situation where we have these little robots that are running around greenhouses and our food problems will be solved. Now, this is the positive side of things. Now, there's a negative side, which one should also consider. You can fix the challenges. Now, on the challenges side, a lot of work that ICT does brings about transparency. So it actually it goes head on against corruption because it makes things plain. Now, corruption fights back, especially entrenched, long-term, systemized corruption. So that's a challenge because some people in power do not want the transparency and therefore would attempt to hold down ICT. Of course, the internet is everywhere and communication is free. So it's difficult, but there are attempts in certain quarters to hold down or monitor for less than noble reasons what's going on in ICT.
Hi, Herman.
Also,
sorry to interrupt. You have about 2 more minutes left just
sure,
to check in.
Done.
Thank you.
Almost done. And then there's the issue of the legal framework. People need to understand copyright, to respect licensing and stuff like that. If there's no licensing, there's no motivation to innovate because it'll be stolen. It does happen. Now, the big problem is that the other big problem, lots of young people are going to come up with very great ideas, lots of ideas over the next few years for Africa. And there'll be wonderful ideas. But there's the need for a way to finance these ideas, for them to go public, for them to go big. And in the West, they have big stock exchange systems which creates the financing for these products. We don't have them here yet. So we need to work on them. And then the big one is that with all this ICT, it is true, we are going to lose jobs. So we have to have a plan for that. AI will lose us jobs. Will bring us efficiency and bring us a better standard of living, but we need a social angle, social policies. We need to anticipate these. I think that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Herman. So now we are going to get into the meat of our conference. So introducing our very first panel discussion, ICT's role in transforming the African continent, which will be moderated by one of our very own coordinators, Keenan Hammer. And with us today, we have the aforementioned Mr. Herman Chinnery Hesse, Uloma Opa, an expert in mainstreaming gender and youth into financial development programs, and last but not least, David Masharia, businessman, entrepreneur, and CEO of Soluciono. He specializes in digital transformation and provides consulting for sectors such as education and health, to name a few.
Thank you very much for having us here today. I am joining you from Madrid. I've been 60 days locked down in the house. That background is my home city of Nairobi, but for the moment I'm in Madrid, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And thank you for introducing us all, Zaria. Thank you everyone for being here today. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time now, so it's really exciting for us as a team, as being the Africa Club, to finally be here today and to have this discussion. And I think we certainly have an interesting discussion ahead, on the information, communication, and telecommunication sector, and also a distinguished panel that was just introduced. We've got the continent represented, certainly. We've got Herman joining us from Ghana. We've got David from Kenya, Oloma from Nigeria, and then there's also all of you. At the moment, there's 114 of us on the call, representing all different parts of the world. So it's certainly going to be interesting. Just to mention some admin up front, we're going to do about 30 minutes worth of discussion, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. So feel free to post your questions in the chat for the time being. The team in the background will be collecting all your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them during the 15-minute Q&A. But for now, let's get into the discussion. I'm going to start with David to kick it off. David, on the continent, on the topic of ICT, what do you think are the key advantages that Africa might have over other developed countries in this sector?
Okay. As my colleague Herman just mentioned, right? Mobile payment solutions in Africa have been widely accepted, okay? So everything, every good and product you pay for, even service, I go to buy my groceries at the lady in the market, I go to buy food in the supermarket, I go to buy a train ticket, I'm trying to pay for a taxi, I am trying to pay my taxes to the government. All of them are being done through mobile payment. So mobile payment has been widely accepted. And once there's a payment system, we can build e-commerce systems around it because the system is already prepared. Compared to over here in Europe, everybody still uses electronic payment is by card or maybe by cash. So over there we have a very big leap forward. Let me give you some numbers, for example. In Kenya, we do have about 30 million. My country has a population of 40 million. We have more than 30 million mobile payment accounts active. That is a big leap forward. That means the market is ready for e-commerce and online solutions. Another thing I would say, there's a lot of untapped markets there. There are a lot of niches that are not saturated, that any entrepreneur or any investor can find something or a part to invest in. There's a big spirit. Necessity is the mother of invention. There's a big spirit of entrepreneurship between in Africans. Africans are builders. We can tap into that, the young population and the entrepreneurship spirit to actually give solutions that work around or use the mobile payments we do have right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's true what you say. And, you know, the fact that we've got mobile payments in Africa, you know, to many of us, I know from the South African perspective, you know, it's probably not taken off as much as it has in the northern parts of Africa, and certainly where you are from in the east. But, you know, an interesting stat is that when it comes to mobile money wallets, the African continent has got more than 50% of all mobile money wallets in the world now. So, I mean, it's definitely one of the advantages, as you've put it. And I know you come from a background where you're very involved in e-commerce, Herman as well. I don't know. Do you wanna add in a point from your perspective, Herman?
Yeah, I think my brother from Kenya has said it all. There's a great opportunity. The issue, I've done e-commerce before and I stopped. The problem was one, regulation, because unlike Kenya, where the regulatory environment permitted it, in Ghana, we were so far ahead of our time that I got arrested for doing financial transactions under the wrong regime or something. The other issue we had was logistics. We don't have a very sophisticated logistics environment. So you end up having to move something that weighs 2 kilos and costs $10. And by the time it arrives in Uganda from Ghana, the transportation is $300. The product costs $10. So that industry needs to become bigger and more harmonized so that the efficiencies are gained. So these are the challenge, but they'll be fixed. I mean, we're not geniuses. The people working on these things every day, people come and go, and they'll be fixed. I'm sure very soon we'll have lots of intra-Africa trade given ICT.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one of the other big points that's been made about the African continent is that from a population perspective, it is enormous. You know, if you consider all our individual countries collectively, you know, the continent at the moment is sitting on roughly 1.2 billion people, and it's predicted to grow to about 1.7 billion by 2030. I mean, that puts us more or less in line with the numbers that we see in Asia, in the likes of India and China. Do you think that, you know, a massive population has a role to play in our competitiveness going forward? And do you think ICT can play a role in enabling that?
Herman to answer? Who's supposed to answer?
Both of you guys can go for it.
Okay, let Kamal go for it first.
Okay.
I tease my Kenyan friends all the time, so go ahead.
I will start calling you Kwame Nkrumah also. So
I like it.
Like it's not about me. So as you said, a big population, yes. And as I said before, more than 50% of the population falls on youth. It's a younger population. A younger population is more inclined to accept mobile or, let's say, ICT solutions. So our big population is a blessing too, because it's a young population. So yes, we can tap into that. We need to educate that population, educate it in terms of what ICT can offer as solutions to the general public. Also, educate the students and the young ones who are coming up so they can be IT professionals. There are a lot of IT, let's say, paradigm shifting events that are coming. Artificial intelligence, robotics. We are makers in Africa. Why don't we get our creative makers who make toys I used to make toy cars from wires when I was a young kid. We can use those skill sets that we have started from young to actually go into robotics ourselves. We need to be part of this. So education is a key part to take advantage of that big population.
All right. Oloma, I know that this is a topic that's particularly close to you. You know, the fact is that throughout the continent, unemployment is very high with the younger generation. And, you know, on the topic of having to educate that population to be competitive in the global arena, that is something that you've been particularly focused on. You know, what would be your focus for the younger population, and how do you see ICT having a role in this education?
So thank you. Just wanting to echo what Herman and David have been saying, that education and skills training are going to be vital in providing the younger generation with the skills, you know, with the knowledge, the skill set, and the ability to turn that into practice that they need to be part of, you know, the new wave of innovation that's going on the African continent. And so through like the work at United Nations Capital Development Fund, what we're seeing is that it's not enough then to have that knowledge and skill set and that ability, but there is that gap between being able to turn that into a tangible product or service that you can then sell on the market to reach your consumers. And so that's where I think like the access to finance bit comes in, and that's where UNCDF was hoping to play this connector role. So we see that there is this large untapped potential. We do recognize that, you know, with the advances that we're seeing in the educational curriculum. So for instance, you have more homegrown solutions, educational solutions. So for instance, you have the African Leadership University, one of the first universities that basically saying we're developing a curriculum that's focused on Africa, that's focused on Africa's needs and on skilling her youth to be able to solve problems and challenges that are relevant to the African continent. But once they've gained those skills, once they want to put that into practice, whether it's through entrepreneurship, you know, developing their own solutions, as Herman and David pointed out, that key thing that's then standing as their barrier is that access to finance. So with United Nations coming into play, and you have other, you know, international organizations like the World Bank that are heavily involved in funding youth entrepreneurship ideas on the continent through launching crowdfunding solutions, you know, more digital platforms to connect youth that are developing solutions in the gig economy, could be e-commerce, you know, so how can we then look at what the youth are able to produce and how can we give them access to the finance that they need to be able to bring those ideas to fruition, but also connect them to markets beyond their local communities. So I think all of those things working in tandem will kind of play a key role in driving, you know, more inclusion of youth in the innovation sector, but actually making sure that they're able to get their message, their products and services to a market that needs it. Yeah.
All right. I think you know, a very interesting topic that you bring up there, the access to finance, and I think I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into that specifically. So Umar Saidi from the International Finance Corporation has stated that SMEs account for 90% of all businesses in Africa, and one of the greatest barriers to SME growth on the continent has been a lack of access to finance. They call it the missing middle. So with Africa having more than 120 million active mobile money accounts, and I know, David, you spoke to this a minute ago, which I mentioned is more than 50% of the global total. My question is, could this be a potential game changer for that missing middle? Like, how do you see it evolving in an African context?
Okay. Okay. You go first, Governor Nkuruma.
Okay. I think that the traditional, and I'm sure David will confirm this, is happening in Kenya. The traditional banks, as we know them, I think they're going to be pushed out over time. There's going to be all these digital financial institutions that serve the needs of these poorer micro businesses. I envisage a time when if I needed to borrow $100 to do a quick transaction and I was happy to pay $1 in interest over 48 hours, I wouldn't be going to a bank. I would do something electronically on my phone. There will be an organization owned by David, which would lend me that money, and I will pay them back in 48 hours electronically without seeing any physical bank. I'm thinking those kinds of solutions are going to be the catalyst to make what you're describing happen. In a lot of cases, our traditional institutions, Kenya may be an exception, but in other parts of Africa, they are dinosaurs. They don't want to move. So they're just very, very stagnant. So this is where I think the development will come from, and where I think
financing. Let me talk about that. I have a really big point I want to express on this one. Africa needs investment, not aid. We need investment in businesses. As we have said, there is an ecosystem which is ripe for returns in terms of there are markets that grow on more than 10% per annum. There's a lot of mobile payments. Any investors, I know there are people over here who are listening from New York, there are people who are listening from other places, investors around the world, even Kenyans in the diaspora who have some bit of fun that they can, it's a very good time to work in seed capital in innovations in Africa. Okay, very small micro payments towards entrepreneurs can give very good returns in the long run. So we need to mobilize investment. This needs to a bit more education, and our governments and politicians need to take an active part in this. Because as entrepreneurs, there's as far as we can go. We do need political systems around it to boost the growth.
Yes, I totally agree. And on the points of the continent needing investment, the growth in Africa is lucrative at the moment. I was going over a few statistics, and in 2018, it was identified that 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world were actually African, and Ghana, where Herman's from, was actually at the top of the list. Also in 2019, in the World Bank's Doing Business Index, 5 of the 10 most improved countries were from Africa. So definitely the opportunities there. We've got the population, we've got people that are optimistic and forward-looking, and we've got the growth rates to prove it, right? So, to bring it back into the ICT landscape, the work environment is certainly evolving, and so is industry. My next question is going to go out to both you, David and Herman again. Do you think that ICT and industrialization are polarizing areas of focus from a job creation perspective? There's an argument that machines crowd out the human labor and take the jobs away. So how do you see that playing out in an African context?
That is an interesting one, okay? My point of view, which is the point of view of an entrepreneur, no. ICT and industrialization are going and should be going hand in hand. Let me talk about some examples, right? Right now, we have technologies that are called marketplaces, and let's say an international way of looking for services. We know platforms like Fiverr, platforms like Freelance with tens of millions of users all around the world. I want to do a logo. Instead of paying in Madrid 1,000 euros to get a logo built, I go on Fiverr, get a Kenyan, pay him 50 euros, and they make me a logo. ICT can create jobs in Kenya. For example, I started a company, English to English. We have a problem in Europe. Spain, Portugal, Italy, they need to learn English. What do we have in abundance in Africa? English teachers. So connect English teachers in Kenya to Spanish students in Europe and give the Spanish students a fair price or a better price for English classes and pay good prices per hour in Kenya to teachers. ICT can create quality jobs in Africa. It's not a zero-sum game that one takes away from the other one. If it's done well with marketplaces, we can create quality jobs in Africa, and we can actually bring up the middle class.
Yeah. Uloma, I'm quite interested to
I'd like to comment on
that. Sure, go ahead, Herman.
Should I go ahead? Okay, I agree with David completely, but there are areas where we differ. I will give you an example. In implementing technology solutions across Ghana and West Africa, I keep coming up. I mean, the most recent one was last year. I did a computerization, which was going to send 3,000 people home. Then the board stopped me. Said, Herman, you must be crazy. This deliverable, we don't want you to deliver it. I said, but your company is losing money by keeping these people on. It's not my business, but I've brought you a solution that eliminates these 3,000 people. It took a social decision, and the fact that the organization was a monopoly. That's the only reason why those jobs survived. They would have been gone. And it keeps happening to me. So this is one story. Second story is, looking forward, I agree with what David is saying, but I'm talking 10 years down the road. AI will begin to touch everything. We need to come up with some kind of universal basic wage or something. When I hear a politician saying, we're going to create jobs in agriculture, forget it. I'm working with some friends of mine on an agricultural innovation. It will be smaller farms, it will be robots, they will be far more productive than any guy with a little cutlass or hoe and that kind of thing. So I think that's also real. I mean, I think even like the teachers, lots and lots of teachers that our countries employ, we're going to end up with 20 to 25 centralized teachers who are very good, who are teaching the kids online, and we'll end up with a better result to the kids. And those 25 teachers may be volunteers from all over the world. They may not even be employed, maybe retired teachers from Germany. So these are also things we need to look into going forward, medium term.
And with that one, let me just add a little small point. Something I'd mentioned before about AI and robotization of our industry. It is something that is coming, as Herman says, in 5-10 years, as we have access to more data, we have access to more AI. Africa needs to start moving now. Training artificial intelligence experts, training mathematicians, training programmers, creating our own infrastructure to keep our data in Africa. Because artificial intelligence works around data, machine learning. If all this data is being kept in servers in California or in Germany or somewhere else, we are not privy to that data. We need to keep our data in African infrastructure, in African servers. That will even make cost even cheaper, and use our creatives to actually create our own robots. We will need robots to go to the farm. Maybe we cannot buy a German robot, but maybe we can buy a Kenyan or a Ghanaian or a South African robot, which is made specifically looking into what Africa needs.
Right. Uloma, I'm going to try and bring you in here. There's a lot of talk going on around digitization, around, as David mentioned, training in the fields of AI, essentially, filling the gaps in. My question to you is not so much about filling the gaps in, but about how we fill in those gaps. And specifically, we come from a continent where things like gender disparity is still very prevalent. And I'm interested to know, what role do you think the ICT sector could play in advocating a culture of equality and inclusiveness, both in the workplace and at home?
So I think that's a really good question, and I think it goes back to a point that David is making about the fact that with the advent of ICT and digitization of various services, what we're seeing is that we are generating a lot more data. And I think when it comes to looking at gender inequality in terms of ICT, the question is, what data are we collecting on how women and men are using available products and services, and how are we analyzing that data, and how are we letting it drive decision making? So both at the government level, at the level of businesses, and then feeding that into the house. How are we communicating that to the households? And so I think that's where it's key for all the different partners to be able to work together. So it's not enough. So for instance, again, going back to my time at UNCDF, we had come into different markets, and we did what we call the State of the Digital Financial Services market report. So collecting data from all the different digital finance providers, and then asking them to, first of all, if they were collecting sex disaggregated data. And it turned out that at the time that we started working on these reports, 50% of the providers were not collecting sex disaggregated data, because for them it was about, how do you get paying customers? They don't really care if it's male or female. They want paying customers.
Yeah.
But then we tried to push them to see what could be the benefits of collecting sex disaggregated data. So I'll give you one example. So for instance, remittances. It's no secret that the funds coming in from remittances form a large percentage of the GDP of most countries in Africa. But then if you look further at remittance data, what it shows is that a lot of the recipients of the remittances are women. And that when further studies on household decision-making and household spending have showed that women tend to budget a lot differently from men, and where they put that money into. So if you want to drive the use of remittance services away from strictly consumption to more investments, either at the micro business level, then you need to pay attention to how are you ensuring that your female customers, who are the bulk of the recipients, are able to make more informed decisions. So are you, as the service provider, providing additional incentives for people to keep more money in their mobile wallets when they receive, remittances, direct some of that to the household, but then invest some of that in more, acquisition of more productive assets and things like that. So I think the more that we were able to incentivize providers to collect this data, analyze it, and then make informed decisions that could drive the growth of not only their businesses, but at a more societal level, the more they started to understand, okay, there is benefit for us to look at how are women accessing and using our services, and how can we ensure that if we do want to keep our customer growth up, if we do want to make more money, if we do want to see equitable distribution of this, then we really need to pay attention to how women are using these services. So I think that that's where it starts. If you want to drive gender equality, you need to be willing, as David and Herman have talked about, one thing that ICT has driven is more transparency, right? The data doesn't lie. So rather than making, these in the sky kind of predictions about what's going on, let's actually take an honest look at the data and see what the data is telling us. And then based on what the data is telling us, we go down to that individual and household level, at the workplace level. We've talked to different women, saying, are you able to access this service? How is this service relevant to your work and your life? And even if we look at ourselves, the services that we choose are because we feel that they're relevant and that they're affordable and useful to us. So sometimes you can be pushing the right service to the wrong customer, right? But if you truly understand your customer, if you understand your users, what they need, what milestones they're trying to achieve in their life, then you can understand if, one, you're building the right products and services, two, if you're marketing them in the right way, and two, if the channels, the infrastructure exists for people to actually be able to access these services. Right. I think that's one way that we can go about driving gender inequality in the use of ICT.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of equality, it obviously transcends beyond just gender. The ICT sector in particular is one that has also been really flattening the playing fields between those that are older and more established in the industry, both companies and individuals, and the youth, right? And my thinking is that the youth have got probably an increasingly bigger role to play in the future of the continent. Maybe not 10 years down the line, but even today. My question is, what would your advice be to the youth of the continent trying to get into the ICT sector at the moment? Like, what would you tell them?
So I think it would be to be vigilant, but have a pulse on, where, as we've talked earlier about, trends and innovation. So I think, again, it should be, how can we use ICT as a tool? So rather than looking to the West and looking at what they've come up with, it's more about taking a look inward, looking at our own lives, looking at our communities here in Africa and thinking about what are the challenges that Africa is facing today? How do I want to be part of solving that challenge? And how do I see ICT playing a role? And that's basically what we've been seeing a lot more of. So even in the time of COVID, I think Herman and David will attest to it, we've seen kind of an explosion in the number of gig economy workers and different solutions. So people doing everything from delivery, we've seen a growth in e-commerce, we've seen a growth in education powered by ICT. So I think it's the youth saying, okay, this is where we're from, we know the local context, that's the advantage that we have over anyone coming from the West. We know the challenges that we're facing and we know what those solutions are. And then others who are more advanced in this space saying, okay, we see that you have a credible solution and we see, okay, what do you lack in terms of education, capacity building, and access to finance, and how can we help you as a youth bridge that gap? So connect you to the right investors, connect you to the right markets, connect you to the right mentors who can help you then, develop a viable solution.
Thank you, Aloma. David, Herman, do you want to add anything onto advice for the youth on the continent?
Okay. One thing.
David, you go first.
Okay. One thing I've always told all my friends and even family members and everybody around me, right? The Industrial Revolution or creating a factory is very capital. It needs a lot of capital. Okay. Creating an IT solution needs a computer, internet connection, coding skills, and a lot of time. We have time. Data, we will talk about data, which is something else that needs to be addressed. But the entrepreneurs right now to actually, as Ulomo was saying, travel, talk to people, see problems, find a niche, create a solution around IT. For example, I go visit my grandfather in the farm. His farm is 20 kilometers from the nearest town. Whenever he needs to buy bags of fertilizer, bags of seeds, that is something that a mobile app could do. We were saying we had a bit of problems with logistics, but we do have small logistics systems inside the continent, motorbikes that go around places, and we can create logistics systems around that. Companies like Uber Eats and Globo and Deliveroo are jumping into Africa and using those mobile and using those logistic systems. Let us create our own systems that actually do that. I go to a city, they need fresh foods. Fresh foods are brought from a farm, from a nearby town, or as from an app. You start paying farmers a better price for their products, and people get fresh food products in their house. There are a lot of solutions that can be attained anywhere. Look at healthcare. Any place, any rural area that needs access to a specialist. Maybe the specialist is in a big town. Maybe there's a specialist who's doing even cooperative work somewhere and they're all connected to their mobile phone. We can make diagnostic system that actually take a photo of the problem you're having and you can send it to a specialist. So we can talk about healthcare, we can talk about food, access to food security. We can talk about a lot of system, agriculture. We can talk about a lot of ways. Just travel around, talk to people, find their problem, and try and see how you can address that problem using ICT.
Perfect. Herman, any final words for the youth?
On Olomo's point, the sexism, I think that, you see, the digital space doesn't lie. It's also democratic. So in terms of the sexism that exists historically, the powers that be that kind of keep these systems, these negative systems entrenched, will lose their power because the digital space will democratize everything. So I think it will be great for women and victims of sexism today. And so that's positive. On the youth side, it's a double-edged sword. There are great opportunities. The problem I have is that because I'm in the space, I can see this movement going so fast. that in a matter of 5 years, the job losses will begin. And by the way, my degree, David, my degree is in manufacturing. Huh?
Yeah.
So I traditionally would have been a manufacturing person.
Yeah.
The amount of automation that I see coming is so big that the youth unemployment bulge. I don't know what the solution is. I can't say I know. I tell my kids all the time, have a general knowledge, just know everything, be a little entrepreneurial, be a good person, and keep your eye on the creative side of things, the arts, the movies, so that you can write books and so on. Because as for the rest, I am afraid in 10 years, they'll be virtually gone.
Exactly. The jobs of the future are not going to be what we know them right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to start the youth towards that skill set, problem solving, being creative, imaginative, trying to use intelligent systems to solve problems. We will transition from what we had before. The Western world was, or let's say the whole world was agricultural intensive 100 years ago. When we started industrialization around the 1800s, agricultural intensive just nearly ended, and we shifted off to something else. Needs a lot of education, needs preparedness, and needs funding.
David, I'm disagreeing with you.
Absolutely.
I'm disagreeing with you on David. I'm disagreeing with you on one point.
Please do. We are both agreeing.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
I'm saying that unlike the other shifts in the workspace and the economy,
right?
You know, when we go to school, we are taught how to do something in school. Then you and I, we leave school.
Yeah.
We do that thing till we're 40 years old, we become experts. By 45, they make us directors.
Right.
That is the space human beings have always operated in, where machines cannot compete with us with that. With AI, it's baffling. That's exactly what AI is attacking.
Yeah.
It's attacking the experienced doctor, the experienced farmer.
Yeah.
So when I was talking about the new skill set, I'm talking about the new skill set in terms of comedy and music, and because anything that I'm thinking that not anything, but 90% of things that need thinking and innovation, thinking out of the box, a computer with an AI engine will outthink us. It will outthink our children. If you need the best way to do a cataract operation, the AI thing will do it better. What it can't do for now is write a good Kenyan literature book which will make us laugh. Even I go there, but not yet.
Yeah,
I completely agree with you, gentlemen. And thank you for the opinions from both sides. It's always a rich conversation when guys disagree and have a few points to engage on. But I'm going to open it up to a couple of questions from the audience now. We've had quite a few that have come through, so I'm just going to start with the first one that's been sent to me. So while mobile has been widely accepted mainly in East Africa, Kenya to be specific, a real adoption challenge remains in other African markets, especially as relating to literacy levels as well as government regulation. Which, in your opinion, should be pursued first and why? Mwanshwawe.
I'll let the governor go first.
Okay, I don't think it's a literacy levels. I know exactly what he's talking about. When Kenya happened in terms of mobile payments, it was because I believe they had a very liberal head of central bank head who was very, and I met him a few times, very enlightened, very whatever. As soon as the establishment banks in West Africa spotted what had happened in Kenya, they jumped on our regulators to regulate a lot of these new fangled platforms out of existence. They couldn't, like I was a victim of that. You can't operate. They say you have to go and talk to a bank. You talk to a bank, the bank is very traditional. They don't want to talk to you. They don't have to talk to you. So they basically killed the competition with legislation, and 10 years have passed. But now they've had to open up. Our regulators are realizing they're getting left behind. They are opening wide, and the traditional operators in the financial services industry are suffering. The mobile companies are having them for lunch. They're eating the lunch badly. So there's a bright future there.
Can I say something about Pan-African cooperation in terms of, as we were saying before, Kenya has made some leaps in terms of ICT. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, we have relied heavily on it. We have tried in our own way to create policy that kind of nurtures it. Nothing is ever perfect, but we are on our way. But there are some other countries that are behind us. We are 54 countries in Africa. Not every country is at the same level. Countries like Ghana are doing well. South Africa is on its own point. Morocco is also doing something. Rwanda is also moving nice in that area. Nigeria needs some work also in that area, but they have a lot of potential. Pan-African cooperation, the solutions that have worked in Kenya, the solutions that maybe have worked in Ghana, the solutions that maybe have worked in South Africa, we could all meet together between ICT professionals and policy makers too, and share ideas for growth. As Herman, as you rightly say, it does put in danger, or it does scare a bit some of the legacy businesses, and they try and find ways. It's a survival instinct. They try and find ways to survive and try and squash it. But there's a Spanish saying that goes, a ripe fruit will finally fall just due to its own weight.
Yep.
If it's getting to a point of maturity, it's getting to a point of there's no argument about it. So we do need cooperation. We do need the policymakers to come together. We do need somehow to bridge this divide of division in Africa and try and actually get our policymakers to do something together. It's all in our part. The more noise we make, the more the public asks for it, the more we create online forums to mobilize people, the more we will pressure the policymakers, and the faster we will move towards that direction.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move on to the next question. I'm gonna try and combine two questions, in fact. So Halimat Raji asked, with the population advantage and the growth potential in ICT, why is it still difficult for investors to see the opportunities? And then also, we've got a question that just came through. My company is ready to invest in Africa. However, the management is questioning how it can be guaranteed that the investments are going to be the right sources or people from EVA. If you guys want to touch on that, maybe Oloma, you can start off with that one.
So again, I understand that, wanting to build trust in the investments and in the solutions before they move full steam ahead with that. But I think there is a lot of evidence already, solutions that have worked, that have been backed by investors, both on the continent and off the continent, and that have shown promise. And we said, it's a mix of things. It's the investment side itself. Do we have people with the knowledge and skill sets, but do we have the right regulations and policies in place? So if I, as an investor, want to come into a country, into a market that I'm not sure of, those are the things that are going to be on my checklist. What are the existing policies and regulations? If I make this investment, how can I be sure that it's going to go towards what it's actually meant for? And looking at the skill sets of the companies that I'm looking to invest in. So I think it's coming in with that checklist, but recognizing that Africa is a bit different from all these other countries that investors are typically used to working with, trying to understand the African landscape, what makes us different, what makes us special, and how can we capitalize on our strengths. The fact that there are a lot of, challenges to be solved, but there is a lot of innovation at the micro level. And how do we identify those people who are doing the real work, and how can we best support them? But I think, the opportunities are there. We have already shown that we have the potential to bring some of these solutions to scale. And it's about now, how do we further those investments? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's true what you're saying. It's a theme that that a lot of investors from abroad definitely think about. And Herman touched on it earlier as well. With regulation and logistics being one of the key barriers to ICT and Africa as a whole. I'm going to take one more question from the audience. Let me just scan through. Yeah, this is an interesting one, and it kind of speaks to the Belt and Road Initiative from China in a sense too. So from Kanya Kubuka, the USA is currently #1 in terms of AI research, and China believes by 2030 they will be leading the AI space. Africa is behind on the curve, but I guess the question is, how do we work together to have an AI hub such as the Silicon Valley or Shenzhen in China? At the end of the day, whoever the leader is, they will be using Africans' data as well. I think we need an African hub, pump money and expertise with skills into that city, and it can be fully focused on AI, something like a smart city. You know, obviously that sort of ties into the Belt and Road Initiative with China as well. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Okay, let me take this one first, right? And before I talk about AI, before I talk about servers in Africa, before I talk about keeping our data in Africa, I need to mention one important thing. Electronic devices depend on energy to run. If we don't have access to energy, a quality energy which does not fluctuate, our AI, our robotic system, our Internet of Things systems that are supposed to be always connected will not run. Africa has, for example, Sahara Desert, just saying something which is utopic. The Sahara Desert is the size of the whole of the US. It's the size of China. It's a potential photovoltaic farm. We are living at an age where solar energy is now at par with fossil fuels, price per kilowatt hour. So first of all, we need to build energy. Then we can build systems which are always connected, always online. Also data. One of the biggest hindrances of the growth of IT solutions is the access of data. Everybody in Africa switches on their data for a short while, does whatever they want to do, and then they switch off their data. Okay? Mobile and broadband data does depend a lot on satellites. So since 1957, when we launched the first satellite, the Sputnik, we have only launched about 2,000 satellites till today, communication satellites. In the next 5 years to 2025, there are different companies that are planning the launch of a lot of communication satellites. We're talking about one company, SpaceX, by Elon Musk, that is going to launch 4,000 communication satellites using Starlink. That will have a substantial effect on the price of mobile and broadband data. We're also getting cable data coming through the sea, optical cables and everything. So yeah, those are things that need to be touched on so that we can actually have an ubiquitous, let's say, AI and electronic system. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative, building roads, building ports, building bridges, building highways, building airports, there's no trade if there's no logistic systems. There's no trade if there's no access to water in the rural areas, if there's no irrigation, there's no trade in food, there's no food security, no trade in food if we're always having famines depending on what nature. We cannot depend on nature. We are very advanced. We're a very advanced species. Irrigation systems are a no-brainer, but they need the right investment in the right things. Invest in energy, invest in irrigation and access to water and food, invest in bringing up the rural areas that do depend a lot on agriculture. And then we can now invest in ICT systems that actually take advantage of the three infrastructure that we have actually built before.
Yes.
So that Road and Belt Initiative, create infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean that ties into your earlier point too, of the fact that the ICT sector really needs to go hand in hand with industrialization and manufacturing. We need to be able to really leverage what the ICT sector can do, but apply it to the industrializing African economy. We'll get into industrialization and the economy in our next panel, but there's definitely a link that the ICT sector can do there, especially as Aloma was putting out, with the fact that there's a lot of youth on the continent and the unemployment rates are high, and we need to try and bridge the gaps there and do it in an African way, in a way that really supports the industrialization of the continent. But guys, Aloma, David, Herman, thank you so much for joining me on this panel. I'm going to hand it over to Zaria and Naima now to take us into a bit of a break. I see so many more interesting questions that have been put forth, but unfortunately, we don't have more time to carry on with them. But thank you again for your contribution this afternoon.
Thank you a lot for having us.
Thank you.
It's really great to actually be offering solutions for Africa. It feels very empowering. And this is something that we really need to do frequently. The ICT, the policymakers, we need to meet more frequently. People in the diaspora doing solutions, people in Africa with a hands-on experience like Mr. Herman here, people who have been in policy and have run systems like Loma. We all need to all come together and actually find Pan-African solutions together.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alrighty, so.
Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for bringing your wealth of information to our panel discussion. I would also love to thank our lovely guests for participating in lively discussion. And finally, of course, to thank our moderator, Keenan, for helping us to have a smooth transition and running this panel great. So now we're going to have a 10-minute break. Get your coffee, take your bathroom break, and we'll be back here at 5:18. Thank you.
Did I just like completely crash it, or did I just completely crash it?
You did really good.
Yeah?
You did well.
It was not generic.
El señor estaba enamorado de ti.
Todo el mundo está enamorado de mí.
No, pero el señor
Welcome back, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Thank you. I hope you all were able to grab a cup of coffee and run to the bathroom during our short break. Now we have our second panel discussion titled Industrializing Africa, which will be moderated by our very own president of the IE Africa Club, James Mobale. Our speakers for this panel include Mr. Chidi Okoro. He is a general manager level executive with over 30 years of experience across industry sectors. He has worked across the pharmaceutical, personal care, food, and telecommunications industries. In addition, we have Dr. Fadel, an economist who has extensive experience in several international development banks. His work covers wide-ranging development issues, including macroeconomic policy, private sector development, and SME finance. Last but not least, we have our third panelist, Ludwig Marisan, a business scientist and entrepreneurial inventor. Time magazine recognized him as one of the 30 people under 30 who are changing the world. And Forbes Africa named him as one of the top 30 under 30 young African entrepreneurs. So we have a great panel that will take place here. And just a reminder that you should prepare your questions for the Q&A discussion after the panel. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Naima. Mr. Ludwig, Mr. Fadel, and Dr. and Mr. Chidi, welcome to the discussion, and I look forward to an exciting engagement. Now, industrialization on the African continent has the potential to transform the African economy, absorb a large youth population into employment, and contribute towards alleviating poverty on the continent. Manufacturing-based industrialization is one of the key focus areas for the African Union's Agenda 2063. And the new Continental Free Trade Agreement will create a continental market that will enable companies to benefit from economies of scale. With that being said, I would like to start off by posing this question, and it is to get a context on what's been happening in the manufacturing sector in Africa. And this question is directed to Mr. Chidi. The question is, how has the manufacturing sector in Africa changed in the past 20 years? That's the first part. And the second part is, do you see any prospects in the manufacturing sector in Africa?
Okay, thank you very much. I think when we look at Africa, and we have a lot of routes to drive our way forward. And I can tell you, I can start right away to talk about how it's changed the last 10 years. If you went back to 30 years, 25 years, many African countries had manufacturing contributing up to 24, 25% to GDP. I think over the last 20 years, it started to decline to about 8 to 10%. Nigeria has it at 8 to 10%. South Africa, Egypt, 14 to 16. Many other countries have it between that range. So a lot has happened. Africa slowed down a bit. But there are various schools of thought, over this. Many believe Africa's manufacturing advancement, has been stagnant over the past few decades. Many think it's been stagnant. It hasn't moved again. Many think it actually declined. And something that over the past few years, you've seen some advancement. And maybe all of those schools of thought are right. And there are issues, and we have to come to that. So many countries from Cape to Cairo have very clear visions. That's what we have seen over the last 10, 15 years. They have very clear vision to propel manufacturing. So there are clear industrial master plans with focus on select sector. So manufacturing, they think about capability development now. So the narratives and determination.
Chidi, I think we might have lost you a bit there. Mr. Chidi? Okay, I think we might have lost Mr. Chidi in the conversation. I would like to ask this question to Ludwig as well, if you would like to contribute to the second part of the question, which is, do you see any prospects in the manufacturing sector in Africa? And maybe we can go back to Mr. Chidi once he's reconnected.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, James. So I think for me, I look at manufacturing, or my experience with manufacturing is limited to the dry bulk product that we market. Although we manufacture it on the continent in Cape Town, we distribute about 80% of the product to Europe, Asia, and North America. So I think my personal view on industrialization or manufacturing in the African continent is, first of all, I think we need to get out of the mindset of thinking of the country, of the continent as a country. I think that's something that we as Africans ourselves really do a bad job of, and then we go and criticize the rest of the world for doing it as well. The reality is we are a combination of high income, middle income, and low income countries, and the realities of each country is significantly different. So it's hard to push any agenda for one specific country. For me personally, I've always approached the problem of Africa towards solving the core issues I see on the continent. And I think they were mentioned in the first panel: the issues of water, hygiene, the issues of electricity, the issues of infrastructure, and the issues of logistics specifically, so that the continents can actually trade with each other. My sad assessment of the situation is, even if I had all the money in the world and I said I'll build all the factories or all the infrastructure that the continent feels like it needs, the sad reality is we don't have the manpower to do it. So that's my first assessment: is the manufacturing capacity of the continent or individual countries is almost limited by the amount of entrepreneurship you see happening in those countries. And then secondly, the amount of human capital skills in those countries, because if you don't have the skills to run those factories, the next issue you're going to have is you're going to have to bring those skills from outside of your country and convince those people to want to come and live in your country and work there. So that's a completely different challenge in itself. So the way we've approached the problem is specifically just looking at helping the throughput at universities, improve the throughput at universities, ideally to increase the number of engineers, scientists, and potential entrepreneurs that get into the ecosystem, because that's the fundamental core issue. The interesting thing about Africa is we've got fairly simple problems to fix. They're problems the rest of the world has figured out solutions to. Then the challenge now is just to have the manpower to implement and have that manpower here instead of going to other countries.
And I completely agree. And it is said that about 100 million jobs will move out of China by 2030. I mean, labor-intensive jobs. And if we are going to be building these industries that we're talking about, we do need to invest significantly in human capital. Now, in the past, we haven't been successful in building the requisite skills base. And my follow-up question to you is then, how can, because I know you're in the ed tech sector, how can ed tech play a role, and what role can ed tech play in the development of human capital that we need for the industries that we're trying to build?
Okay, so first address that first question. What we do with our company, the EdTech company, for the rest of the audience, is called Excel at Uni. What we do is we work with universities and people who sponsor tertiary students for funding, whether it's bursaries, scholarships, etc. We provide these guys with a system that tracks their students' performance on a weekly basis at school, and it detects very early if a student is failing and whatever reasons they might be failing for. Then we offer interventions, whether it's private tutoring, mentoring, etc. And we measure all those interventions to see if they're effective. And we've been doing this for about 6 years. And over the past 6 years in South Africa alone, we've managed to cut the dropout rate for our clients by 75% in terms of the number of students who are not finishing. Now, the reason this problem for me is key, especially when you look at the rest of the continent, is in South Africa, bursaries or companies funding your studies is actually a common thing, but in the rest of the world, it's not. The majority of the rest of the world has to get student debt in order to finance their tertiary studies, and that's the case for the rest of Africa. But if you look at the throughput rates for that sector, so if you consider how much money is spent on tertiary education versus the throughput rate, that's the problem we're essentially trying to solve. The idea is that the majority of Africa's problems, what would I call it, the infrastructure, the technological needs, all those products and systems we need have already been developed somewhere else in the world. It doesn't really matter. The fundamental problem in my assessment is how do we get the talent, the human capital on the continent to be able to leverage those resources. And I like the fact that this gentleman earlier, I've just forgotten his name, who was in with the Bluetooth earphones, was mentioning the fact that we need to learn about respecting intellectual property. And for me personally, that's one of the last things that frustrates me about the journey that Africa needs to walk. So already it was going to be a tough road to get to where we were going. It was planned 2063, which was already far enough as it is. I will have seen Halley's Comet by then. I was actually thinking about it. I think Halley's Comet comes in 2061, and I'm happy to die anytime after that. And that's the plan we currently had. And then COVID happened. And it hasn't been mentioned on the platform, which is also quite concerning. But ideally, in my head, the impact of COVID is going to be 5 to 10 years before the global economy fully recovers. It might not even come back to the level we're at. I think the global economy is due for a fundamental restructuring, even in what we call money. I don't think the US dollar as a reserve currency will hold within the next 5 to 10 years. So if the world is going through so much turmoil, and we're here talking about Africa and what's going to happen, but we're not incorporating the fact that we're going to lose almost 5 to 10 years of development that we had achieved over the past few decades. It's a tough one. Right now, it's very much in the air, and it makes me even more pessimistic about the possibilities for Africa. But my main thing is to say, priority number one needs to be making useful human beings. A big debate around the world right now is universal basic income. And I think the big discussion for Africa and the African countries is actually going to have to be universal basic usefulness, which is we're going to take care of you, we're going to feed you, but in return, as a human resource on this continent, there's a certain basic level of usefulness you're going to need to have.
100%. And yeah, you've touched on the importance of developing human capital for these industries that you're trying to build, and also leveraging off some of the technologies that have been developed elsewhere. I'd like to go back to Mr. Chidi and find out if he's, I think he's back, find out if he has, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll speak about, let's speak about the prospects of expanding manufacturing across African countries. I think the prospect is there. We all understand that. We've spoken about how manufacturing contribution is shrunk across Africa. And we see manufacturing footprints of major multinationals being here. It hasn't expanded over time. I think there are a couple of factors underpinning manufacturing and attractiveness, and Africa does have a couple of that, and we can go through that. With 1 billion population, many of them young and aspiring to consumption status, even if you can question the capacity of a good percentage of that population, you have a key ingredient to support manufacturing. So labor and potential consumers exist. Africa is home to thousands of natural resources. These can become primary and secondary inputs to manufacturing. I think with Nigeria, you do have the oil and gas story, limestone, coal, South Africa, Egypt, oil and gas as well. Textiles is there, Ghana, Ivory Coast. So investment and development capital is available. Apparently it's available. However, there's work to be done to attract and apply. Africa's location is also a huge advantage. We're pretty close to Middle East, we're close to Europe. Those are two big markets. And African countries need to gear up to compete in the manufacturing sector. We need to gear up to compete. It will not be a stroll. So I think with the existence of global manufacturing hubs and competition for markets, the work is cut out. There are a couple of issues we must think about. Number one is the way we make the choice across Africa. Talent and capability has been spoken about. Impact of intelligent machine. There are two sides. I think the last panel mentioned that, artificial intelligence is great for us, it could also have implication to how many people can get employed. So I think the narratives, of political and business leadership, ease of doing business is improved in a few countries, still bad. So in general, Africa's prospect for manufacturing loom large, with the potential for job creation, value addition, and to wealth, in the continent. And as major developed countries reconsider their manufacturing centers, maybe Africa can position to profit at this stage. So the prospect is certainly there and very glaring.
Thank you so much. So indeed, there are prospects from what you both have said, and I mean, you've also mentioned the large resources, natural resources that we have, and I believe we've got about 85 trillion worth of discovered natural resources on the continent, and these contribute about 30 billion in government revenues that can be used to actually accelerate and develop these industries. Now, my second question is, can you share some strengths, opportunities, and challenges along our path to African industrialization? And I'd like to maybe start with Dr. Fadel on this one.
Thanks, James. Well, I'll start with the challenges to get that out of the way. Well, the obvious one, I think it may have been mentioned in the previous panel, but I didn't follow it all, is demographics. So you have the youngest population globally, and the population grows very quickly. And at the same time, you have a very slow industrialization process, and you want that industrialization to be able to cover millions of new entrants in the job market over the next few years. So my concern is, like, usually we don't look at demographics. It's almost taboo to talk about demographics, and we talk about demographics as if it's an exogenous variable. It's just happening, and we need to figure out very creatively how to create those jobs from industries, from services, and so on. But it is not an exogenous variable. So here you have some of the examples is the importance of women's education to reduce fertility rates, and awareness campaigns and so on. I mean, let's not get into the details of how to do that. But just the bottom line is it's not an exogenous variable. Now, a young population can be a strength rather than a challenge, but then you need to have a decent level of education, a decent level of skills. And I encourage you to read the latest African Economic Outlook of the AFDB that we just released in January on the future of the workforce. Education and skills are among the lowest in the world. So you cannot talk about diversification. You cannot even start talking about industrialization if you don't have a solid human capital base. And the current crisis, the one that we know a bit too much about now, is laying bare the importance of human capital and on the health side. So you need first a strong healthcare system to have healthy people, and second, you need to educate them, and then you can start talking about diversifying to new sectors and so on, and matching education, skills, and vocational training to emerging skills needs in the market. Because there's a lot of surveys showing mismatch of skills needs from both the employee and the employer. Now, if we want to talk a bit more about opportunities, well, to be pragmatic, we keep on talking about what happens in Asia, the Asia miracle. We talk about, how China did, how South Korea did, and so on. But, the advantage is you can start already looking at a few regions, a few countries within Africa and learn from them. And because there's that proximity and, shared issues as well, it's easier to pick that up and to implement some, customized version of it. And one obvious example I have in mind is Morocco, an industrialization plan that happened over the past few years, I think 5 to 6 previous years, and the ecosystem approach So basically they bring in FDI, they bring an automobile industry, they bring aerospace industry, Renault, Bombardier, and so that's the aggregator. And then they start connecting SMEs and small suppliers, which starts building up a network, an ecosystem, which is connected to regional supply chains, and global value chains. So that's one way to do it, and that also leads to improvement in skills. You get new academies that are created, like Aerospace Academy, to train new talent. So a lot of things can be learned locally. I'll just finish with another opportunity, which just because for me it's just so obvious that it's almost painful. And one of the bases to develop your industry is to have energy, right? You need to have enough energy, and developing the renewable energy industry is a no-brainer. And given that you have more sunshine in Africa than anywhere on Earth, it's just a no-brainer to get started there. So you have a few initiatives that started like in the Sahel region and across, west to east. You have a few, other initiatives started, like example, national level in Morocco, and you can literally at some point start not only having enough electricity for the continent. Like Sahel has 64% of the population in the Sahel region don't have access to electricity. So not only you can have electricity for yourself, but you can start exporting sunshine. Literally, I call it exporting sunshine. Australia at the moment is starting a project called Sun Cable, and they will start exporting literally sunshine to Asian economies, to Singapore and other countries. That has to be started right now. And you can start a green industrialization to be competitive in the future and leapfrog the development phases that more advanced economies have gone through to optimize their industrialization through pollution and so on.
Thank you so much. And I think you've touched on some of the challenges and opportunities as well. And I'd like to focus more on the opportunities. And one of the opportunities that I see as well, the new Continental Free Trade Agreement. It is said that it has the potential to double our actually manufacturing revenues in the next 10 or so years. Now, my question around this is, how can this Continental Free Trade Agreement be a catalyst for African industrialization?
That's an interesting question, and kind of comes back to what Ludwig was saying about not considering Africa as one single country. I mean, that's usually a big mistake, especially to people outside Africa. But then, as he said, we also sometimes make the mistake of making it a monolithic continent, and there's a lot of heterogeneity. However, a initiative like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a way to integrate these different segments and give way more potential to industries, to companies through a single market. You'll have like a $3 trillion single market with 1.2 billion consumers. And again, another shocking thing and shocking evidence that struck me when I first saw it is the size of the African economy is smaller, all of it, with all the small segments, segmented markets, is less than the size of the French economy. That's just very telling and shows that there's a lot that needs to be done. Now, the AFCFTA has potential, huge impacts. We're talking about simulations showing gains of 4.5% of GDP of entire Africa, $134 billion extra of GDP, and that's just by reducing tariffs, non-tariff barriers, improving the trade facilitation. Then you can add to that regional public goods. So we're talking about regional infrastructure, connecting power grids and so on. So from all of that, you can have, there are a few dimensions that are beneficial to industrialization here. You talked earlier about economies of scale. That's an obvious one. Single market, economies of scale. The second one is there will be an increase in trading intermediate goods and capital goods. And these are essential for industrialization. And that's how you'll be able to move to higher value add sectors and higher productivity sectors. You have diversification of exports. So that allows you to be more resilient to shocks. So we've seen now during the crisis at the moment, most of the countries are facing, oil price shocks, commodity shocks, and it's very volatile. The economies become very volatile as well. And I'll just finish with another one, which would be improving the export sophistication. So the free trade agreement would help countries and their enterprises connect to regional value chains, global value chains with higher standards, higher quality standards, environmental and product standards. And that will add to the sophistication of the products that emanate from African economies.
Thank you, Mr. Fadel. And we just have a few minutes before we go into the Q&A. And I just wanted to get like a brief comments from Mr. Ludwig and Mr. Chidi on the same question.
Okay, you want me to go? Okay, good. I think on AFCT, I think that's moved now to January 1, 2021. It would have been July 1 this year, whereby I think 90% of the goods can move unhindered. Manufacturing is a game of skill. It's a skill game. And Africa with a $2.5 trillion economy and with splinters of, $100 billion economy here and there had no game. It was going to be very difficult to crack that. So with coming together, you can find a skill and then you can compete. The other thing he offers is he offers negotiation leverage. So Africa can negotiate as one country, or you can say one country in quote. Across Africa, you do have different capabilities. So with AFCTA, you can bring those together and actually share knowledge and assets. And in that way, you can see development happening. The other thing I say is there's homogeneity within Africa's diversity. Even within all the diversity of 54 countries, 54 cultures, you do have thin line and homogeneous lines across. AFCTA actually brings that together. So Africa gains leverage, gains skill, and our manufacture can really start to make a meaningful sense. If we go as individual countries, it's going to be a much longer road to crack.
Thank you so much. And I think it's very important because I know Mr. Ludwig and Mr. Fadel also emphasize the fact that all the different African countries are not the same, but it's also important, as you mentioned, that we identify that there is homogeneity in all these countries, and we need to basically exploit some of that. Now, Mr. Ludwig, would you like to add on to some of the strengths, opportunities, or challenges that you see along our path to industrialization? And actually, I have a question for you that might be direct, because I know you invented the wonderful dry bath gel, which is the world's first waterless body wash. However, one of the challenges that I know you faced is the demand, like domestically in South Africa. And as you've mentioned, 80% of your sales are outside of South Africa. How did you deal with that challenge, and how did you get access outside of South Africa?
Thanks.
You need to unmute.
Okay, it's unmuted. It doesn't want to allow me to unmute when it's muted. Okay, thanks for the question. Before I answer that, I just wanted to make a comment on some of the stuff that's been mentioned. So yes, we've got the Sahara Desert and we can do solar, but the harsh reality of solar, almost any renewable energies, you need a power store. So the only reason we can even talk about Australia is because they asked Elon Musk to build them a large ass battery just to be able to store that power to keep it constant. And it's still, the jury is still out on how successful the whole project is going to be. So that's the harsh reality, is either you invest the money in power stations or you invest the money in battery power, but either way, the money has to be spent on something. And then just on the question you're asking me now. So when I started Dry Bath, when I invented the product, the idea was to provide hygiene to those who could not afford it. And the harsh realities I faced is, if I manufacture locally and I trade from the continent, even though my markets are export markets, the sad reality was the product was just too expensive for the market. So when we started out, the product was about 50 Rand per wash. So it's about $5 per wash, which is quite expensive for the African market, even for governments buying in bulk. Then after the Cape Town drought, we were able to bring the retail price down to about $1.50, but we know that the key price point is 50 US cents per wash. It doesn't work unless it's cheaper than that. So until that day, I can't really entertain Africa or the African continent or other emerging markets really, simply because the price is too high. Now, the tough conversations I've had to have is, you would try to raise funding and investors will actually say, yeah, interesting product, but why aren't you in America, or why aren't you in Europe where the product is being sold? I can't find a business in South Africa that's selling where you don't actually live or have any relationships. So that's been one difficult part of it. And another part for me personally, the decision was, I love being home. I love South Africa. It's one of the, I'll say, better off parts of Africa, in the sense that I can still have my first world living, if I'm going to be bluntly honest, and still be able to access the rural markets that the continent makes available. And the reality is, by me choosing to be here, even as an entrepreneur, even as a business, there are certain returns, guaranteed returns, that I'm giving up, that my investors would be giving up. And if you consider South Africa's exchange control laws, it gets even more complicated than that. But the idea is, you individually as the person make the bet on the continent, or you make the bet on your country that you're staying in on the continent, and you say, you know what, I'm going to push through. I might not be the one that enjoys the fruits of our labor, but I think that's the biggest thing for me personally missing from the continent, is we love to talk about it as one thing, but the reality is we don't have a single mindset, and even our leaders don't have an empire mindset. So even if, at least if they had it, to say, okay, look, we're trying to build an empire, we're trying to build self-sufficiency, and we're coordinately working on this too. It's 2063, but the sad reality for me is I would be willing to buy into the 2063 plan if I had faith that the leaders would actually be able to carry it through. But it's disappointing that we've got a 40-year plan and I don't even have leaders that I can rely on to execute that plan in 40 years. So if anything, in 10 years, 2030, we're going to be launching a new program, and that's the sad part of it.
Thank you very much. We are running a little bit out of time, and thank you very much to all of our panelists for the contributions. And we'll be moving now into the Q&A session. I've received a couple of questions. And the first one is around technology. And the question is, how can African industries leverage AI, machine learning, and robots in factories in African solutions?
Is that to anyone specific?
I'll open it to anyone who would want to take that on.
Can you please repeat it? I think some of us might have actually missed it.
Yep. The question is, how can industries leverage AI, machine learning, and robotics in factories in African solutions?
I'll put my head out there, my neck out there. So I think for me personally, first of all, I'm not qualified really to give a definitive answer on the question. For me, I look at it almost philosophically and say, okay, look, companies are profit-seeking entities and they will continuously try to optimize on their profit model. So you can't really say Africa will implement this thing. Different companies on the continent will implement this thing. Some of them will be local companies. Some of them will be multinationals operating on the continent. So the value derived from it will go to different places. That's why I keep emphasizing the fundamental problem for me is you don't have enough competitors. So when I say you, I mean those who speak on behalf of Africa or say they advocate for Africa. You need to produce more competitors. That's actually the only way out. Is right now you've got competitors coming to your home turf and out competing you. And I can swallow that pill. I'm comfortable if I know that I'm using the benefit that they're producing to produce my own team that can compete with them in 20, 30 years. And as for AI, it will be implemented. The question is who's going to derive the value. A lot of technology will be implemented on the continent. The fundamental question is who's going to be benefiting.
Thank you for that. And the second question is around competing with the likes of China and the US. The question is, do we see African countries competing with China and the US in terms of volume that may be produced, while also implementing pricing strategies that would not hinder the development of the manufacturing sector?
I can jump in if there's nobody else who's ready to do it. I mean it comes back to the current trends that started before the crisis and continue now, which is U.S., China. You could see robotization, and that links to the previous question we were talking about. AI, robotization, automation trends have been on the rise, and they will be accelerating over the next 3 years. And that means there will be a reshoring of jobs, low-skilled jobs, low-cost jobs from Africa towards these countries, back to China, and so on. And so there will be just for the sake of illustration, the percentage of robot sales for Africa is 0 compared to skyrocketing share of sales for China, way more than the US and Europe. So if we want to talk about competition, Africa is way behind. I mean, it's at a 0 level. Now, if you want to link that to the industrialization conversation, that means that the industrialization time window for Africa, using more labor-intensive type of industries, is very narrow because compared to Asia in previous decades. So we don't have that luxury. So in terms of competition, you're way behind. However, if you look at what's happening during the crisis now, it's there's a lot of discussions around reconfiguring the global supply chains away from having one single supplier like China on its own, US on its own, because of the previous very simple-minded cost model, which is low cost at all costs. So now we think more about diversification of suppliers. We think more about the risks of disruptions to the global supply chains, both by MNEs and by advanced economies. And that there is now a competitive advantage in this case now for Africa. At least there's a positioning advantage for Africa to play a role in this diversification. And I think before Mr. Chedi mentioned that Africa is close to Europe, close to West Asia, close to the US, and so this trend will play to the advantage of Africa to be that offshore base to produce. And there's also a trend of localization now, and again that's to the advantage of Africa.
Thank you. There's a third question that just came in. Peter Sarita is asking, the buzzword is technology these days. However, the reality of Africa is connectivity, or simply put, accessibility to technology. How do we transcend this new world amidst our social and infrastructural challenges?
If I may, just quickly offer my comment on this before someone else gets in. I like the question, especially when it relates to the situation we found ourselves with COVID and in South Africa specifically. So I've been watching closely what the education system or the education department has been trying to do to figure out how schooling is going to work, etc. And one of the big things I assessed from the situation is this is one of those rare opportunities where, as a government, I could mandate that for the rest of the year, so between now and December, the whole country needs to brush up their digital skills. Everybody needs to learn how to use a computer. There's no more school. School is everybody learning how to learn digitally. And then next year, we restart the year from as if it was 2020. Whoever was in grade 8, they repeat grade 8. But at least I used that rare opportunity to actually say, most, if not all, of my population had an opportunity to develop these skills for the fact that a lot of carnage is going to be coming over the next 5 to 10 years, as I said. And if you can't use email and if you can't use the internet to be productive, you're not competing in that world. My big fear is that the world is going to go into, as I said, this phase of austerity. And I think most of my thinking comes from Ray Dalio's assessments of the situation. I think he's got one of the most beautiful assessments of the economic impact of what COVID is going to do to the world economy. And the big challenge is there's going to be a big drive to digital. And unlike the 2008 market crash, where the market crashed, but at least you were still partying and buying drinks. So you're still fueling the economy, you're still spending. Now we've got a crash and nobody's spending because everybody has to be home. So it fundamentally compounds a problem that was already growing. And for me, the opportunity right now is exactly what this question is asking is sort out, you won't sort out the issues of connectivity overnight. There'll still be people who don't have access, but for right now, you had that unique moment to say, everybody who has access, we're going to force you to actually learn how to use that access or maximize that access for the world economy after this.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll wrap up our Q&A at this point. Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists or speakers. And we've touched on very insightful conversations. And I would like to hand over to Naima.
Okay, hi everyone, sorry for that little delay. Thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your insights on the opportunities as well as the challenges Africa has in terms of industrialization. And thank you to all of the attendees for engaging in the discussion with your very relevant questions. I would now like to introduce you to a special guest, Dr. Nadu Denloy, who will offer the closing remarks. After a very impressive career in ICT as the Group Managing Director of Telnet Nigeria Limited, she also led an ICT company that she co-founded in 1986. So she's now retired, but she's joining us today. So without further ado, please welcome her to the stage. Dr. Nadu?
Yes.
Are you here? Awesome.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I am. Can you see me?
Yes.
Can you see me? Hello?
We can see you
Can you
and we can hear you.
Okay, that's good. So a very good evening to everyone. It's a great honor and privilege to be part of this conference. IE has been very consistent in promoting perspectives, contributions, and opportunities in entrepreneurship and innovation in Africa. You know, this is demonstrated by its work through the Africa Center, the IE Africa Club that has brought us all here today. And of course, its large African student community and its drive towards African participation in the faculty and on advisory boards. I'm here as a member of the IE advisory board of the IE Fund. So I commend Santiago and the entire IE team for their forward-thinking approach, because indeed, to the discerning, and I know that Ludwig would probably not agree with me from his comments so far, but I really think Africa's time has come. You know, it seems just a few short weeks ago, it just looks like a few short weeks ago, when we had our IE Fund meeting, and teaching all the courses. A lot has happened since then. Well, and here we are today. So I'd sincerely like to appreciate the keynote speaker, Mr. Herman Chineri S., and all our panelists for their enlightening contributions and for their unique insights into the topics discussed. I'd just like to do a quick wrap-up of what we have heard. Okay, there's been so much. I'm not going to be able to take all of it, and it's been very exciting and very insightful. Okay, so why Africa? You know, why doing business? Like I said, I mean, IE has been very focused on the whole bringing Africa to the fore, showcasing Africa, and looking at opportunities for Africa. So why is it so important, and why are we thinking about rethinking doing business in Africa at this time? We've heard about the population and the market size, youth demography, you know, obviously to a problem, particularly opportunities. So even before the crisis, I mean, like we've always seen that there are problems in Africa, and we know that there are gaps. And like Mr. Herman Hurst said, we have no legacy system, so it's an opportunity to leapfrog, okay? And in terms of demography, what a huge youth population allows us to do is the youth of adoption of technology. We heard about the great entrepreneurship spirit. David brought that up, that Africans, you know, were very entrepreneurial. And yes, well, Nigerians, and you know, Nigerians for sure. We've said that they're different. We're all different, although we're all in this continent of Africa. But most African countries, and I'd say for sure that, I mean, Nigeria and Kenya, you know, we're very entrepreneurial. So we have great entrepreneurship spirit, which we've heard. And then there's the issue that was brought up about African solutions to African problems. Well, not just African problems, and it's a byword that IE has used a lot, African solutions to global challenges. And indeed, it's not just, as I think Uloma mentioned, it's not just about bringing solutions from abroad and applying them straight to Africa. We have to look at solutions, our own problems in the first place, and then solutions in the context of Africa, in the context of who we are, in the context of the particular country, possibly, but then there are heterogeneous lines crossing across us as a continent, as Black people, mostly, okay? And in looking at African solutions to African problems, we heard about the mobile payments, and that's where Africa, has, and probably more so Kenya, accounts for more than 50%. And looking at M-Pesa and all that. And then where are the opportunities? The applications in health, agriculture, security. Mr. Herman Hurst talked about his own solution, his security solution using drones and all. There are obviously obvious applications in education, media, and communications, finance. We've seen the upsurge of fintechs all over the place. And was talk about the importance of data generation and data analytics and owning our own data as Africans. I'd like to use the example of, there's an African company, 54 Gene. They're looking at, they're collecting and data for the African they're collecting African genetic data. So things like that are happening. And it's very important. And there was talk about, the gender equality, using data to make informed decisions, and the importance of data as a whole and data analytics. Now, also, what are the challenges? Challenges, the need for respect for IP, intellectual property, that came up. Access to finance for young entrepreneurs. The whole issue of leadership, government regulation, and not having the legal framework. And education and skills is a big issue. Now, in talks about government regulation, I'm a bit encouraged because we had four state governors in Nigeria, just talking about the COVID experience and what has happened since then. You'll see that with the COVID, there has been a rapid, it's acted actually as a catalyst for expanding the adoption of technology. It just got everybody unawares. Immediately, what do we do about education if our schools are closed down? And particularly the people, the poorer community who do not have access to data, do not have access to phones and all that, what do we do? And so the whole issue and of course we know about health. I mean, we're scrambling all over the place. And so all this has come to the fore, and it's really provided the incentive, and the, not just this incentive, it's created the need and it spurred the importance of, developing our digital technologies. And I was quite impressed with the governors actually. I mean, well, there's still the whole issue of trust and all that, but they spoke very well, but then they were passionate, and I could sense the passion, and like it's a wake-up call for everybody. And I personally believe that it's a wake-up call for us all, and things are going to change. In terms of African collaboration also, we've seen webinars, because we're now, don't have to, it's allowed us to all connect. Like even at this conference now, we're from all over the world connecting. And so that collaboration and that's connecting with the rest of the world, it has brought that about. And so that's a good thing. And so the governors, like I said, the things they needed to do in health, talking about the Lagos State governor was talking about putting, there's been issues, so many issues that have gone in the past, like right of way and all that, to providing a fiber network infrastructure for Lagos State. And, so they're all now thinking, oh, we've got to do that. We've got to improve on this. We've got to do that. So I see that it's a good thing. And I think that the ease of doing business, which has been an issue, one of the challenges, that also will be brought to the fore. And so there's a lot more dynamism well, not post-COVID, COVID is not over, but as a result of the COVID. Now, talking about Pan-African cooperation also, that was something David brought up, and that the need for Pan-African cooperation. So there's the Smart Africa initiative, which I think was birthed in Rwanda, but I think most African countries have signed up to that. And I have actually also been in webinars where we had a lot of collaboration. I mean, a lot of people from all over Africa, different parts of Africa, bringing up ideas, and we talked about the need for better collaboration. We had where the for from NITSDA in Nigeria, the IT development agency. And so there was also, I think, somebody from Ghana. So there's that happening. And so there's that impetus for things to change. Now, David, I'm not going to go into that argument. David and Herman had this argument about AI, about the loss of jobs, and well, in 5 to 10 years' time, what could be happening and all that. But I think, what do we do? business models, what kind of policies, what kind of education and training. Okay, talking about education and skills, okay, that is another issue that came up as a challenge, education and skills. So if we can see into the future, we're looking at these things, we begin to put steps in place to ensure that and business models that will support the development of Africa. What else on that? Yep, I think I will just quickly move on to the second panel, Industrializing Africa. Again, there's a talk about the population, you know, and the population over 1 billion, 1.7 billion in 2030, or yeah, is it? That's allowing for, so what does that do for us? Labor, and we have the labor. Fadu, I think, said, you know, the industrialization time, the gap, because of AI, is very short. You know, so if we're looking at labor as a leverage, that might not be the case. But then there's also the issue with, you know, this COVID thing, diversification of supply chains, that become a big issue now, and everybody's talking about that. So it gives us an opportunity, you know, diversification of suppliers, and then the competitive advantage of our location in Africa, where we are in Africa. We're not so far from the Middle East and not far from Europe. We're like in the middle of the world, and we're nice and warm. It's a warm country. So that's that advantage that could be an advantage. And of course, investment and development could be available. Of course, there are challenges. And as Ludwig said, that's a big challenge of the human race. If we're going to industrialize, do we have the skills gap that we have? And his work that he's doing with in EdTech, Excel at Uni, tracking systems performance at schools to provide intervention so that we can actually have the workforce that are going to participate in this in this manufacturing, you know, the manufacturing-based industrialization for us. Of course, we know about AFTA and the African Union 2063 plan, but then they're all plans. We've had several plans in the past, but then I think that COVID really has provided a wake-up call for us. And I believe we do have some leaders that and wise counsel that's, you know, going to begin to make sure that we're not just talking paper talk, but we're actually implementing. Interesting things. Ludwig also talked about universal basic usefulness. We have to be useful to ourselves, teaching ourselves, I mean, like youth, everyone, to be useful, okay? And what else do we have here? Exporting sunshine. I like that. Obviously, energy is a big issue. I mean, that came up in the previous panel about lack of electricity and the challenges of electricity. But then we've talked about developing renewable energy industry. That's an area. And back to the issue of leadership and regulation and leadership and regulation. I think that include in every there's opportunity, and I think for me the pandemic is advancing, will advance, and it is advancing the adoption and embracing of technology across board. Let me also give the example of the online education. Now, so you know, we've had companies that have been at the edge, the fringe edge of the mainstream, having solutions that they've been showing, I mean, like wanting support for adoption and embracing, but then there's nothing. All of a sudden, this pandemic, and now schools is looking for a solution to making sure that children get educated. And so people that have been developing solutions over the past 10 years that just didn't get traction, all of a sudden finds that there is traction. So we've done things in the past, digital channels and the banking digital channels and the fintechs, but even more so now with the COVID, there's so much opportunity to do so much more. And I'd just like to close by saying again, reiterating that it's about us, about Africa, not just necessarily copying or just adopting other solutions, but creating and developing solutions in the African context for Africa. And, in terms of social entrepreneurship, I'd like to give the example of, I think, Chris Christopherson, where he talks about non-consumption and the prosperity, what is it called? Prosperity paradox, about market creating opportunities. When MTN, when the GSM companies came, and they got licensed and they paid what we thought was, over the board for licenses and all that, and wondered, are they going to get the kind of consumer numbers that who is going to be able to? They've just paid too much for the licenses, and they themselves, they did not realize that people would buy data, would buy a card, and use that rather than do other things. And so it exploded. Yep, I've got to finish. Okay, so it exploded. So I'm just saying that you think that one thing is that there's no opportunity, that people cannot afford certain things. But then when you create business models that allow for creating markets and developing value chains, then there are very good prospects there. So on that note, I'd like to thank you and say that I hope that we've learned a lot. I personally have, it's fashioned my thinking a bit clearer from this whole conference. And thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Over to you, James.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denloy, and for the wonderful wrap up and bringing our discussion this afternoon together. I would like to take this opportunity to thank, firstly, our amazing speakers who shared quite insightful remarks today. I would like to thank, and a special thanks to the IE Africa Club members, the Campus Life, IE Campus Life, IE Africa Center, International Development Department, our IE faculty, and everyone who's made this event possible. We thank you very much for all your support throughout the year. Last but not least, I would like to thank my amazing team for making this event possible. I'm honored to be part of an amazing team that's so passionate about the African continent. And I guess after today's discussion, we can all agree that there are opportunities on the continent, even though some challenges that have been shared as well. And I believe that, and I think Keaton touched on this as well, that we as a youth need to take charge of the change and transformation on the continent. Thank you and enjoy your day further.